pay and benefits. Compensation refers to all forms of financial return and tangible benefit received by employees in return for work performed. So it's all pay, all benefits, it's basic labor cost that the employee receives. Compensation systems are strongly related to corporate financial performance. Financial systems motivate people, they reward people, and they can be significant, have significant power on the overall performance of an organization. There are a number of trends in compensation that we're going to talk about. One of them is diversity in strategies. It used to be that people basically got paid for time, either in a salary or by the hour, and they had a certain set of fringe benefits. Today, there's a lot of movement away from that kind of standard pay system. You'll now see pay for competencies or knowledge. You'll see pay for teams. A lot more incentive programs are being used by organizations. So there's a lot more diversity in how people are paid. The second one is that the benefit costs, and particularly healthcare costs, are soaring for companies in the pay system. Almost all benefits are going up. Healthcare, eye coverage, insurance coverage, just about all the benefits. Pay inequity continues to be a problem in pay systems, and that's a trend that's being worked on. Top to bottom inequity has increased. Male to female inequity still exists, and it's moving very slowly. So there's a lot of movement and a lot of desire to change pay inequity, which still exists in the system. Pay is also used to communicate organizational change. Human resources used to be just basically a maintenance function in organizations. Today, it's really a strategic function. So you'll see a lot more of the pay system being designed so that it changes the corporate strategy, or it moves along with the corporate strategy and helps organizational change. The pay for competence is part of that, incentive pay is part of that, etc. Compensation is therefore in a state of transition as organizations experiment with different kinds of pay structures and different benefit structures, and it's also in transition as the cost of benefits goes up, because as the cost goes up, usually the number of benefits given goes down. It's part of, just like the iron triangle in healthcare, as costs go up, access goes down, and it's pretty much the same in pay and benefits. The next question is, does pay matter? And it matters a lot. It motivates and it directs behavior in organizations. It is a major issue in attracting people to an organization. It's part of the selection process. So attraction and retention of talent is an outcome of a pay system. It's also about 70% of total labor costs. The cost of compensation can decide success or failure for most organizations. In any organization, 60 to 70% of their total costs are pay, because people are what run an organization for the most part. There are lots of capital costs in many organizations, but paying the people to run the machines is the critical factor. Does compensation matter to the individual? And it does. It's instrumental, it's symbolic to workers. They believe that they should be paid equitably. They have a sense, all workers have a sense of what they think they are worth, or what they are worth against what other people are being paid in other organizations. And so pay lets someone know how they are valued by the organization and where they fit in the organization. U.S. workers tend to prefer pay for performance systems. U.S. workers like incentives. That's one of the things that continues to drive American productivity up, is that pay for performance or incentive systems are built into a lot of organizations, and they too do tend to drive up productivity. Workers are always satisfied when pay is equitable, when it's equitable within the organization, across people, and it's when it's equitable across organizations, same job, different organizations. So workers pay attention to that. So creating a pay structure that creates equity across organizations within the organization, um, and pays people for performance is important. There are 5 essential objectives for effective compensation systems. Any compensation system needs to attract and retain competent workers. If you're not paying enough to attract workers to your selection pool, you're going to have to change your compensation system or your benefit system. The second is that a pay system should motivate employees' performance. It should foster feelings of equity, it should provide direction for their efforts, and it should be enough to motivate them to come to work and to work. So motivation is the second objective of an effective compensation system. The third is that it should support and communicate and reinforce the organization's culture and values and competitive strategy. An effective pay system not only pays people equitably for what they do and maintains them, but it will also support where the organization is trying to change, where their new strategic direction is, or support the basic culture. If the culture is cost cutting or higher quality or high performance, whatever it is, the pay system should reward that and support it. The fourth is that the structure of the pay system should create a cost structure such that the organization is able to pay it. The organization cannot create a pay structure that's beyond its ability to pay for its compensation. If it can't pay, it'll go broke and go out of business. And the fifth one is that any pay system or compensation system has to comply with government regulations, and there are a lot of them. There are regulations that deal with pay, how much, when. There are regulations that deal with benefits, and the regulations are at the federal level, the state level, and the local level. And so there are a number of laws that apply to pay and benefits, and the organization has to meet those laws. There are 2 parts to any compensation system. Cash compensation is direct pay. It's the dollars that you receive in your check when you get paid. That's direct compensation. Fringe compensation are benefits that are legally required or discretionary. Some things are required, some things the organization can decide to do or not do. Collecting money for and dispersing unemployment benefits or Medicaid or Social Security, those are legally required. They're mandatory. Other things like benefits and like vision benefits or health benefits, those are discretionary. They're not particularly required by government entities, but companies do it to attract workers. So you've got cash compensation and you've got fringe compensation. Younger workers would like to have more of their check in cash compensation, direct pay. Older workers tend to put more emphasis on the fringe compensation, retirement and health benefits and that kind of thing. So there is a distinction between type of worker on type of compensation. But always remember, compensation is not just the cash you receive. It is all the benefits that are required or not required, and it is all the things that a company gives to employees, even besides things like Social Security and health benefits, like a cafeteria that may be subsidized, or counseling services, financial services, all those kinds of things. It's all considered part of the compensation system. A lot of employees just look at the cash part of the compensation system and say that's it. But that really may only be 50 or 60% of the total labor cost for an organization when they figure all the benefits and everything else in. Cash compensation, base pay. We're going to talk about job evaluation in a little bit. Job evaluation, it really provides the means to systematically assign pay to jobs. So the dollar cash that we're assigning to a job and makes jobs different in a pay structure is usually defined or described in a pay or a job evaluation system. There's a figure 10.3 in your book, which talks about the traditional approach to compensation. It's a system. Much like we talked about a system in the training chapter, compensation is a system too. You start out with job analysis, which I think was chapter 4, and you analyze the job. You develop a job description from that. You use the job description to determine what the job equity is within the organization using job evaluation. And then you look at the labor market data to look at the equity of that job compared to other organizations. So when you've got the job description, you plug it into the job evaluation system to look at internal equity inside the organization, and then you use that to compare to the similar jobs in other organizations, and that's called labor market data. It's data outside your organization. You then, from that structure, you develop a pay level. You put that within a pay hierarchy, a pay system in your organization, and then you pay people. So we're going to talk about all those. We've already talked about job analysis and job descriptions, but we are going to talk about job evaluation and equity, and then we'll talk about pay structures and how that works. And then we'll go on at the end and we'll talk about benefits and then the legal requirements for the pay system. So that's where we're going. We're basically going to follow this model, talk about how to do job evaluation, how to look at labor markets for external equity, and then how to put it into a pay structure, how to add on benefits, and then talk about the legal requirements at the end. Let's start with internal equity. Internal equity is basically how individuals perceive their pay relative to others in the same organization. Job evaluation is the system that's used to create internal equity among jobs, and the data input to that is job analysis, and there are different methods for doing it. What you do in job evaluation is you take a job and you take it apart, much like you did in job analysis. You can take that job apart in different ways. You can take it apart by tasks, or you can take it apart by levels of what has to be done. Some jobs don't require any analysis. Some jobs require nothing but analysis. Jobs that require nothing but analysis are typically paid higher than jobs that don't require any analysis. Jobs that require only physical labor tend to be paid less than jobs that require a lot of thinking, advanced knowledge, analysis, etc. And so that's how that equity is created within an organization. Is you take the job apart and you look at its pieces, and do you see, is it dangerous? Does it require higher education? Does it require heavy thinking, analysis, or conceptualization, or other things? Does it require particular competencies, et cetera, and you can actually assign dollars and cents to each of those things. You put it back together and you get an hourly or a yearly wage, and then you stack your hierarchy of the jobs within your organization from lowest to highest. CEO tends to be the highest, and janitor or something is probably the lowest. But then when you do that and you let people understand the system that you're using, most people will understand where they fit in that hierarchy. And that's the job of job evaluation. There are basically three different kinds of job evaluation. There's three different ways to do job evaluation. One is job ranking, the second is job classification, and the third is the point factor system. Ranking is just exactly what it says. You get a committee of typically supervisors together, and they look at the jobs and they simply rank them. And they say this job should be paid more than this job should be paid more than this job. And that requires, one, someone who knows all the jobs. It requires a small number of jobs, usually less than 25. Most people don't do it even when there's 25 jobs. But if you get a number of jobs, in there, you'll start to get big disagreements about how the jobs rank out. And so it's a subjective system. It's based on incumbents. The incumbent supervisors usually make the decisions. And it can only be done in a small number of jobs. So the use of job ranking in organizations is fairly limited. There are not very many organizations that get beyond 50 employees that would use job ranking to do job evaluation. It's a good system, but somebody's got to know all the jobs. There's got to be a limited number of jobs, and it is subjective. Job classification is a little bit more complicated. For the most part, the only people that use job classification is the government. The federal government system is based on job classification. A lot of the states have copied that. So for the most part, job classification is limited to government jobs. But what you do is you categorize jobs, you benchmark specific jobs that you know are similar. So you go outside and you say this job in the real world or in another organization is paid at this level. And so you classify your jobs in groups of classifications, and then you take specific jobs out and compare the wages on them. And then you would evaluate each job in that class from there and just go out from your benchmark job up or down and set pay rates. And then you extrapolate that to the whole system. It's not a complex system, and it's usually done on fairly common job denominators like responsibility, ability, and skill and knowledge, something fairly simple. The U.S. government has 18 classes, and I think they use 9 factors to do this with. So you really have a fairly small matrix of deciding what the real pay is in a job. But it's basically a system where you put all your jobs together, you take particular known jobs out, find out what the wage is outside, bring it back and extrapolate that up and down the system and figure out your wages. Again, it's a kind of system that if you have a huge organization with a lot of different kinds of jobs and you don't broadband, I haven't talked about what broadbanding is, but broadbanding is spreading a pay band out to include a lot of people. And the government does that. If you talk about the U.S. government, all the employees are put into 18 levels, GS1, GS2, GS3, and so forth. There's really literally millions of people in 18 classes. Most organizations spread that out much further. But the U.S. government does it so that people can go from agency to agency and stay within their class. And so we'll come back to broadbanding. The point factor system is much more complex. Sometimes it's called the factor comparison system. Most companies use factor comparison, the point factor system. Almost all companies that do it on about 5 factors. Some do more, but skill, responsibility, physical effort, mental effort, and working conditions. And if you look at a lot of job descriptions today in the current world, you will see it broken down that way: skill, responsibility, physical effort, mental effort, and then working conditions. Obviously, if the working conditions are horrible, pay goes up. Mental effort, more of that, pay goes up. Lots of physical effort, pay might go up, might go down. Every job is compared independently at least 5 times for whatever number of factors you have. And so you define your factors, you assign a point total to each factor. Most factors have weights, and so if you have mental effort, you might have no mental effort to identify things, to classify things, to analyze things, to conceptualize things, to create things. So that's a multiple list of a hierarchy of mental effort. And so mental effort is one of your main factors, but you might have 10 steps or weights within that factor. So I'm going to judge every job on mental effort, and I might judge it at 10 different levels, from virtually no mental effort to somebody who has to be highly creative or innovative. Innovation may be one level and creative might be the next level. Innovation is easier than creativity. Innovation is taking known things and putting them together in different ways. Creativity is making up new things. So creativity I would pay somebody more for because it's a rarer skill than innovation is, etc. And as you go down the line. So that you can see the hierarchy of pay on 10 different levels of mental effort. What you do in the classification system is that you assign dollars to those distinctions. In the point system, you assign points. And what happens is when you assign points, and then you create the whole system, you can change the dollar or the cents usually per point, and then the whole system just automatically adjusts. Over in the job classification system, once you change the dollar amount, it jacks up with inflation, you have to redo the whole system. And so that's why the point system is a much better system and why most people use the point system, because they've got this whole system going with 5 factors and maybe 10 levels of every factor. So they're judging every job on 50 different things, 5 times 10, 50 different things. But those things have points attached to them. And so you judge a job and you end up with all this information and you say, okay, this job is worth 37 points. Well, you take those points and you just multiply it by the dollars and cents per point, and you've got a pay for that job. And it's a lot easier, and you can, every year, every 6 months, you can adjust your dollars per point, and the system doesn't disrupt. You just jack the pay up based on the points. So you define factors, you assign point totals to the factor, you break the factors up into different levels and assign points to the levels, and then you analyze the job based on each one of those levels. Now, of course, you're also, again, taking jobs out and looking at external equity. You're comparing that job to what other people pay and bringing that in so that you know what the dollar amount is, and you build it backwards into your points. But this is usually done within a job family, and a hierarchy is established based on the factors and the weights within the factors. And you end up with a pay. And it's simple. HR officers like it because they can take a job, plug it in, get the points, assign the dollars, boom, be done. And you can find computerized systems today which do that automatically. And so it's a much easier system for most people. So most organizations, you also, by the way, you can also, well, let's go into external equity, and I'll say that. Most organizations use factor comparison, point factor system for job evaluation. Job evaluation, again, is the system that is designed to create equity within the organization in the hierarchy, or create a hierarchy of jobs that looks equitable to employees. When you say that I'm in this job and getting this pay, that makes sense to the value of people or jobs in the organization. Um, External equity is whether your pay is similar to your competition. Are you paying the same thing other people are paying for the same job? If you're underpaying for the same job, you're going to have a hard time recruiting people because they would rather go to the other organization and make more money. Now, if that other organization has very poor management, their managers are mean or they're inconsistent or whatever, people will know that, and guess what? That company will probably have to have higher pay, and so you can have lower pay than that organization because it's got bad management. You can also have lower pay compared to another organization because you make up for it in benefits. Most universities, for instance, have lower pay than the organizations surrounding them for secretaries and janitors and room cleaners and whatever. The reason being that they give a free benefit of going to school. And so people will come to the university to get free tuition for themselves and or their families. Private schools tend to give to families, public only to the employee. But they will come to school at a lower pay and get free tuition. And so it equals. Always remember, labor cost is really what is going on here. Pay and benefits can be traded out, and pay and management can essentially be traded out. Most organizations won't admit they have bad management, but you'll find that they pay a little bit more to attract people than the organization with better management. So those things are a trade, and that's what external equity is all about, is that I want to be able to attract people equally with my competition, or I might want to attract more and better people, and so I might try to pay more. But I'm looking at that equity, and I don't want to pay too much more than anybody else. I just want to be able to attract good talent and not be at a disadvantage compared to my competition. We do that usually through salary surveys. There are a number of ways to do it. You can benchmark salary levels by going to Chamber of Commerce. In healthcare, almost all healthcare organizations belong to associations that do benchmarking. They benchmark quality indicators, but they also benchmark salary while they're doing it. So I can go out and I can say, okay, against Texas hospitals or Houston hospitals, what's the pay for all these different job categories? And the job categories are very similar. I mean, a nurse is a nurse and a technician is a technician, etc. And so I can almost always find the job and look at it against the other hospitals that I'm competing against. And of course, you'll find differences between medical center hospitals and rural hospitals, and differences between for-profit, not-for-profit, and public. So all of that's taken into consideration, but I'll see a survey of what all the pays are. ONET is another, the Occupational Outlook Handbook of the U.S. government. You can always go there and you can always see job descriptions and pay structures and pay for a job. And so there's lots of ways to find relevant job market information for pay levels. You can actually conduct your own survey. Some companies do that, but that's tending to be a lot less typical in this day and age of computers and associations that collect the data for their members. Once all that information is made or gathered, you've got internal data, you've got the pay structure internally using job evaluation on your jobs, and you've got it externally, kind of sideways, by looking at the rest of the world, or at least your direct competition. So you bring all that data together, and then you create a strategy. You're going to sit down and say, okay, we are going to lag or meet or beat our competition. You're either going to lag behind in pay or benefits, or you're going to meet what your competition is doing, or you're going to beat them. And you will make that decision based on all the stuff we've already talked about. If I'm going to make up low pay with benefits, I can lag on pay. if I want to beat the competition, then I'm going to pay more. Anheuser-Busch, for instance, has a brewery and bottling complex on the ship channel here in Houston. They always have had the strategy of beating the competition. Anheuser-Busch typically pays more than the organization sitting next to them, so they can attract better talent. Now, better talent for them might be as simple as people that come to work and stay sober, etc. But that's important. I mean, people coming to work is a very, very important issue. And so by beating the competition, what they do is they attract the very best people that are going to put up with whatever the rules are at Anheuser-Busch. People want that job because the salaries are higher. And if they want that job, then they're going to be motivated to come to work and stay at work and do the work properly. And so that's a strategy. So you choose your strategy, your pay strategy, and then you develop a pay structure. You will essentially put your pay into a set of boxes on job category, and the pays will differ. And that's where broadbanding or narrow banding comes in, is that a narrow band says that I might only pay about $5,000 difference from the top of the category to the bottom of the category. That's a narrow band, which means that your band shrinks up. Instead of being all technicians in the hospital, then it's probably a certain kind of technician that's in this band, and then a different kind of technician in this band, and a different kind of technician in this band, because you have to pay more. I don't know enough about technicians to know, but my guess is nuclear radiology techs probably get paid more than respiratory techs or whatever. But it depends upon skills, it depends upon length of training, it depends upon how rare they are in a job market. All those factors go into it, but what I'm going to find is that I probably have 4 different levels of pay for techs that may be $15,000 apart. So I have to make the decision, am I going to broadband that and have all technicians in one band where there's a $15,000 pay difference, or am I going to narrow band it where I've got these kind of techs, I mean Tech 1, Tech 2, Tech 3, and Tech 4, and you might have seen that in organizations. The reason that I would narrow band it is that I'm putting constraints on my managers to keep people in fairly narrow widths of pay, because the pay differs so much by the different kinds of technician. If I don't care about one manager paying too much for a particular kind of technician, then I would broadband it and say, okay, all technicians go in this band, and there's a $15,000 pay difference there, and you can pay whatever you want within that pay difference that's reasonable. And what happens is that gives the managers a lot of leeway to increase wages to attract people or keep people or whatever. So there are a lot of reasons just within the pay system for doing one kind of band versus the other. There are also reasons outside the pay system. If I want to flatten my organization and have fewer kinds of jobs, fewer job categories, I will broadband it. If I want to keep a whole bunch of people in one group, like all the technicians and all the nurses and all the bioengineers, so that they can make decisions and flow back and forth and take different kinds of jobs, I'll broadband that. If I bring a competency system into an organization and start to pay fully or partially on competency, I'll probably broadband that organization, because the competencies will go across a broader band of jobs. Does that make sense? And so if I'm paying on competencies, I could probably have many more jobs within a certain pay level on level of competency. So there's lots of reasons that strategically you'd start thinking about how your bands are set and what the pay level band, the differential in pay level is, and what the actual pay level is. Now, when I say lag, meet or beat, remember that people change their pay systems at different times of the year. My fiscal year might be October, because I'm in an academic institution, but the guy next door's fiscal year might be January. And so I may set my pay structure in October, and boy, I'm beating the market. But guess what? He sets his pay structure in January, and he beats me. And so for 3/4 of the year, he's going to actually beat me. And so I have to outguess him when I create my pay structure if I'm the first guy that sets it. So pay structures, you never set a pay structure so you lag or you meet or beat anybody the whole year, because everybody's changing their pay structures at different times. Okay. We've talked about broadbanding. We've kind of talked about pay for knowledge and competencies. I think I talked about team pay a little bit. One of the trends in salary administration is to pay teams rather than individuals. And so if you have created a team that's truly a team and the outcome is team-based, then you really have to pay the team rather than the individual within the team. Most people don't do that. It's most teams that are created in organizations are temporary. And they don't stay together for long periods of time. And so usually individuals are paid and then they're put on a team, and the team has to be motivated and facilitated in some other way rather than pay. Only where you set a team together for long periods of time and that team has an objective it has to make that is irrelevant of the individuals within the team, then you would pay based on team. And that becomes a little bit more complicated, because most of the pay laws, most of the legal requirements are based on pay for individuals, not teams. The law hasn't caught up to team pay yet. And so team pay can get kind of complicated. Let's stop and let's talk about government influence on compensation systems. The first law that affected pay is the Fair Labor Standards Act, passed in, I think, in 1938. It sets minimum wage, overtime pay, child labor laws. The Equal Pay Act is now part of it. The Fair Labor Standards Act sets minimum wage. Basically, you have to pay the minimum wage. 18 states and a whole bunch of cities have a minimum wage that's higher than the federal minimum. And the law states that if the states or the cities pass a minimum wage act that's higher than the federal act, then the employee has to be paid the higher wage. Federal law does not prevail in wage and hour when it comes to setting of wages. The highest wage prevails. Tipped employees can be paid less. Tipped employees can be paid $2 and something. I can't remember exactly what it is. But your tips and your wage have to meet the minimum wage regardless. So you must be paid the minimum wage, but it can include tips. It also covers overtime pay. Anything over 40 hours in a week or 8 hours in a day is overtime pay, and it is paid at 1.5 times regular pay. And so overtime pay is covered in the Fair Labor Standards Act. All of these laws that are at the federal level that affect directly affect pay systems are dealt with by the Labor Department. The Fair Labor Standards Act was amended in 1963 to include the Equal Pay Act. We talked about that in Chapter 3. Men and women must be paid the same if the job has the same effort, skill, and etc. And so it doesn't say that similar jobs are paid the same. It says that jobs that have the exact same requirements for skill and effort and responsibility are paid the same. Pay differentials are permitted on seniority, merit, quantity of work, quality of work, any factor other than sex. Sex is the only factor that you can't have pay differentials on. And we all know that there still are pay differentials. Women are paid, I think it's 78 cents on the dollar in the United States for what men are paid on average. That difference is because lower paid jobs have higher proportions of females in them, and that's why. And the reason is we do not count similar jobs as having equal pay. We'll come back to that towards the end of the chapter. In 2010, the Dodd-Frank, it's called the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, was passed. And it applies to publicly traded companies, and what it does, it basically says that shareholders nominate corporate directors, compensation committees have to be composed of independent directors out of the board to set compensation for executives. Companies have to disclose executive compensation. Shareholders get a vote on executive pay. If executives give false information on financial filings, they have to give back their financial incentives. That's the clawback provision. And so if executives do financial filings as required, and they falsify that, they have to give back all of their incentives. The Lilly Ledbetter Act was passed in 2009. It's the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. The bottom line of that is that the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act says that for you to file a claim of discrimination, it has to be within 180 days of the act of discrimination. Well, the problem is that when companies have pay secrecy policies, they don't tell you what the pay structure is. People don't know that they are being underpaid, and it's usually much later than 180 days into the job, where they've accepted the job, that they find out, or a woman finds out, that she's being underpaid compared to the man. And so what happened was the Supreme Court said for years that you're not meeting the 180-day filing requirement for equal employment law. Therefore, the case is moot. You cannot bring it forward. And so what the Lilly Ledbetter Act does is that it makes the 180-day filing period a requirement for each paycheck rather than your total compensation system. So each paycheck, you can turn around and file a claim if you think you're being underpaid. So it really opens it up for women to file equal pay legislation. It's very pro-woman, and it applies to all protected classes, but it's really designed for women. There are 3 acts that deal with prevailing wage. The Davis, you can read about them, the Davis-Bacon Act, the Walsh-Healy Act, and the more current one is the Service Contract Act. These laws, and their each one's an extension of the other, these laws basically say in federal contracts, where a company is a federal contractor, they must pay the prevailing wage to workers working on that contract. What the prevailing wage in a union state is the union pay. And so the prevailing wage tends to be a higher pay. Where there are unions with union contracts, that's the prevailing wage. If not, it ends up to be what the wages are in wage salary surveys, which is really the average pay. And so that will drive up pay to at least the average. And in states that are not right to work states, it'll be the prevailing union wage, and that'll be higher than the average wage. Now let's come back to equal pay, because I want to talk about the issue of similarity. The Equal Pay Act says that if a job has equal skill, effort, responsibility, and working conditions, the job will be paid the same for a man and a woman. So a man and a woman will get the same pay if their jobs have equal skill, equal effort, equal responsibility, equal working conditions. But the defining word there is equal, okay? Most jobs don't have equal skill and equal effort and equal responsibility. If you go into like a high school and you got high school teachers, the janitor may in fact be paid higher than maybe the low seniority teachers. And if you look at those jobs, to some extent they're kind of equal in what they're required for mental capacity and physical labor and stuff. How it all adds up may be similar, but it's not equal. It's not equal skill, equal effort, equal responsibility, equal working conditions. But if you start to add those things all up, they become similar jobs. If you put policeman and housewife into a pay evaluation system, a point system, they tend to end up about the same. But as we know, housewives or nannies aren't paid very much, and policemen are paid a lot. And so the issue is that in Europe, pay structure is based on an assessment of job worth in comparisons to the external market, not equal requirements for skill, effort, and responsibility. As long as it's similar skill and effort and responsibility, most European law requires that the jobs be paid the same. Now, I told you that in the U.S., the difference tends to be about 78 cents to the dollar. In a lot of the European countries, that gets up into the high 80s and 90s. I think in Europe, Sweden is the highest, and it's about 92%. So women are paid 92 cents on the dollar compared to a man paid $1 in Sweden. And that is because they have pay equity, not pay equal laws in Europe. So the Supreme Court, because it's conservative, has repeatedly turned down cases that have tried to argue pay equity in the United States and required the Equal Pay Act to stay the way it is. And so there's a discussion in your textbook about that. And one of the reasons there's a discussion in your textbook about that is that your textbook is not healthcare, specifically healthcare related. It's a general textbook for companies, larger companies that also have international operations. So the last section of this chapter is pay systems outside the country, and I'm not going to talk about that in this lecture, but pay equity in other parts of the world tends to be better than in the United States. We pay only the similar or same wage for equal jobs, not similar jobs. That's the difference. The key word is equal versus similar. We pay same pay for equal jobs, and that's a hard distinction to meet legally. Anyway, there is an act that's been reintroduced into Congress for the last 2 or 3 years. That's called the Paycheck Fairness Act, and it would establish equal pay for equivalent work. That's probably not going to see the light of day soon, particularly given that we don't have enough money to pay for what we're doing. We're borrowing money. It would also be have a devastating effect on business. Stock market would not crash, but it'd go down a lot because that would drive up labor costs for organizations significantly. So it will never happen in a Republican administration. Probably won't happen in a Democratic administration either, simply because of the negative effect it would have immediately on business. But the law's there, and it has been there for a while. Let's talk about that's pay. That's the cash part of pay. Now let's move to fringe compensation, employee benefits. Um, Benefits are really kind of focused on improving the quality of life. They're there to attract and motivate and retain, just like pay is. Um, but there's significant cost advantages to both the company and to the employee because of favorable tax treatment. There are a number of things that aren't taxed. The money that goes into um, medical benefits, for instance, is tax exempt. One of the things that has been talked about in political campaigns is that we will reduce or we'll take the loopholes out of the tax system. One of the huge loopholes is medical plans being exempt from tax. That's an enormous amount of money that would become taxable if the law was changed. Just like mortgage interest for homeowners. That's a massive amount of money. Um, I shouldn't tell you how much I save, but I save about $20,000 because mortgage interest is tax deductible. I would be really not happy if somebody wanted to remove that tax loophole. And so those are kinds of ways that to fund the government, and we probably should look for some of those things being discussed in the future as we try to lower the amount of money we're borrowing and get a balanced budget, because one of the ways to balance the budget is to pull more money out of the system, and the two huge tax loopholes that are really worth, tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, are mortgage interest, which has nothing to do with company pay systems, but the benefit packages that are tax exempt are huge. Most of us probably are about $1,000 a month. The employee doesn't pay that much, but totally between what the company pays and what the individual pays is probably about $1,000 a month for a good medical plan. If that became taxable, you can imagine across the entire population of the United States that's working and getting benefits, that's a huge amount of money that would go into the government's coffers to start to pay for things. So, right now, benefits are extremely attractive to everybody in the system because they can be provided at a lower cost because they're tax exempt. I would rather, as an older guy, have benefits because I'm using them rather than pay. You guys would probably rather have the pay, but you're being taxed on every dime of that pay, where I'm getting benefits and not being taxed on it. So most employees underestimate the cost of benefits. The surveys have asked employees what they think their benefits cost, and they say about 12%. The actual figure is about 31%. That's the average. Some companies is up in the 40, 45 range. But benefits account for 30 to 40% of total labor costs in most organizations. Benefit packages vary a lot by company size and culture and whether you have unions, though the compensation packages in unionized companies are changing because they're moving away from defined benefit plans. Often companies tend to have cafeteria-style benefit plans. Some have set benefits, some have cafeteria. So there are different trends in how benefits are offered. There are 4 categories of benefits. One is legal required programs. 2 is discretionary welfare plans. 3 is discretionary retirement plans, and 4 is time off. There's actually a 5th, and that's employee services, and we'll come back to that. So call it 5, but there's 4 big ones. Legally required stuff, discretionary welfare, discretionary retirement, time off, and employee services. The legally required or government mandated programs are Social Security, unemployment insurance, workers' comp, and their Medical Leave Act is required. COBRA is a required thing, but not everybody takes that. Social Security is a program that covers retirement for people over 65. It's getting to be 66 starting now. Survivor benefits for spouses, disability, anybody who's disabled can collect Social Security, and it includes health benefits, it includes Medicare. So if a person retires at a certain age, it's 65 for older folks, 66. It goes up. It's going to be 67 here in a few years. I can retire at 66, and I will gain a retirement based on my salary over the years. If I die, my wife, who has been married to me longer than 10 years, can collect my benefit. If I was to become disabled even before 66, I could collect a benefit. And so that's what Social Security is basically money for retirement. You pay for it. You pay 6.2% of your income. You pay 6.2% for Social Security, and you pay 1.5% currently for Medicare. It's a total 7.65%, and it's shared by employee and employer. So both sides pay 7.65, the employer and the employee. And it's not huge amounts of money. It's a couple $1,000s a month for people that are in the $100,000 range for salary. But it for a lot of people, it's either all of their retirement or a big piece of it. There have been studies about how much savings people have for retirement, and the average amount of savings is $14,000. So there's tons of people with zero savings for retirement out there, and they're going to live on Social Security. So it's interesting. Social Security, when it started in 1938, there were 39 people paying into the system for every person that had retired. In 1950, it was 16 people for every retiree. In 2010, it was 2.8 people. That's going to come quickly down to 2 people. So right now, 2 of you are going to pay for my Social Security, essentially. The trust fund runs out in 2037, thereabouts, and then taxes will totally pay for it. And taxes will only cover about 78 to 80% of the money that's being paid out. Now, granted, we're already borrowing to do that. The trust fund doesn't have any money in it. It's all been borrowed by the federal government to cover budget deficits in the past. So the trust fund is basically a whole set of IOUs that are sitting there, which the government has to pay back over the next however long the bonds are for. And so taxes are, all that kind of runs out. The trust fund runs out in 37. Even now we're borrowing to pay for it, and then only the taxes that are collected will pay for 78% of what's being paid out. So you can see that in the next 25 years, there's going to have to be a fix for Medicare. Either the benefits are going to go down or the taxes are going to go up. Something's going to happen. And my guess is that the benefits are going to come down and the taxes are going to go up. Dealing with people that are getting things like Social Security and Medicare, and now the Reform Act, the medical benefits, it's hard to take those away once people start getting them. And those people vote. And so if you say to people about Social Security that I'm going to start lowering your Social Security, they're going to vote against you. And so it's hard for a politician to stand up and say, we have to fix this system. And so they'll do it piecemeal. They'll do it in little ways. They'll do it by raising the age when you can retire. They'll do it in very small increments of in tax increases. They will lower the benefits that people can get. And so it'll get chipped away in all the different little ways, and such that it'll pay for itself. And so that's going to happen in the next 25 years. Medicare provides health care benefits to citizens 65 years or over. It is also funded with a tax, that 1.45%. It is also underfunded. It's run by the states, and most of the states are borrowing money from the federal government to pay for Medicare today because there's so many people out of work. There are 4 parts to Medicare. You should have learned this in foundations, but A is hospital, B is medical insurance, C is Medicap insurance, where you can actually buy a managed care policy that covers the whole thing, and then D is the drug coverage. People can buy in when they retire to all or part of it, and they can change their coverage every fall. I think it starts about October 1 and ends in December 7th or something, the period where you can change your coverage. Right now you'll see all kinds of advertisements on TV, because right now is October, for people to change into managed care plans for Social Security. Now all that advertising will disappear by Christmas because the changeover period is different. Most people that retire with a benefit plan from their companies only take Part A. When I retire from this university, I will be covered by health insurance from the state of Texas, and so when I go into the Social Security office, I'll only sign up for Part A, and it only would sign up for B, C, or D if the university somehow in the future dropped its health coverage for retirees, and that's probably unlikely, but you never know. I mean, the states are getting broke, so it could happen. But if it does happen, I'll just go sign up for B, C, and D, and you guys will pay for my Medicare. Sorry, but that's the story. And that's why, by God, don't take away my Social Security, or I won't vote for you. And now you see, as young people, you don't get those highly felt issues like taking your benefits away. But you will find that Social Security and Medicare and things like COBRA and the Reform Act are very important to big populations of people. Actually, the Reform Act, once it kicks in 2014, is going to be important to a lot of people that are getting health benefits that didn't get them before. Right now, because we're in 2012 when this lecture was given, the coverage for children has kicked in. So there are a lot of families out there that now have coverage for their children under the CHIP Act, and they don't want to see the Medicare and Medicaid go away or be changed in any form, because they're getting coverage for their kids when they might not have had coverage before. So they feel strongly, and it really becomes a very large political issue. Another one is unemployment insurance. Unemployment insurance is designed to keep workforce stability. It is also covered by a tax on employers. It is managed jointly by the feds and the states, and the tax rates are based on pay trends and unemployment rates. As the unemployment rate goes up, the tax rate goes up for unemployment insurance. So the tax rates in most states are very high today because of the high unemployment. And so unemployment insurance is one of those legally required programs that is an employee benefit. Another is workers' compensation insurance. It's managed solely by the states. It pays for expenses that are related to work-related injuries or sicknesses. And it's a 6.2% tax. It's a no-fault system. I mean, if you're injured on the job or you get sick on the job, it's gonna pay. Employers are fully responsible for the cost. The employers pay that tax, and the benefits come out of it. The next one is COBRA. It's a Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act. It was passed in 1985. It's called COBRA, COBRA. It is basically a temporary extension of employer group medical insurance. If you work someplace and you have medical insurance, you can extend that medical insurance up to 18 months. It's designed to give you coverage when you're between jobs. And so if you leave a job, you can ask for COBRA coverage and you will get the same insurance you had for up to 18 months. The kicker is that the individual pays the full cost. And most of us don't realize what the full cost is. And in my check, you look at it, and I pay like $202 to cover my wife, my family, for insurance. I get full coverage on my insurance, and I got to pay $200, I think, for the family. Well, if I had to pay the whole thing, what the employer's paying is $642 thereabouts. I'm going to end up paying $900 for that insurance. So yeah, I can get it, I can keep it, but I'm going to pay the full amount. The last one is the Family Medical Leave Act that was passed in 1993. And eligible workers that have worked someplace for 12 months can have 12 weeks of unpaid leave for taking care of a family emergency, usually at birth of a child. But other things are included too. And it can be the spouse or the mother giving birth to the child. It can be either. You can split it too. It's kind of weird. But you can return to the same or equivalent job. And a lot of people take that. All of my kids have in when they've had their children. But that's a required benefit from the U.S. government. Going back to the European differences, Europeans are much more generous about it than the United States is. For when you take leave in a lot of the European countries, the government pays for it in government taxes. The company doesn't pay for it, and you can take much longer leave. So. Discretionary plans, let's start talking about health care plans because that affects you guys. One of the points I want to make to you is that you're going into a healthcare career and you are basically, for most companies, considered overhead. Think about that. And to you, you're going to get a job in healthcare and your employer is going to be a healthcare employer, blah, blah, blah. But for most employers in the world, healthcare is a discretionary benefit that they could stop tomorrow if they wanted to for their employees. You are considered an uncontrollable part of their labor cost. They don't look on you kindly, essentially. As you drive up costs, that drives up their costs of benefits, which means that they probably have to reduce benefits to their employees, which makes their company less attractive to the employees. That's how they look at you. I know you're looking at, oh, I got a job in healthcare and this is fun and I got to work really hard for my employer and boy, they give me good benefits and good pay and blah, blah, blah. You're overhead to the rest of the world. You are a discretionary cost in the benefit system. So you're probably only going to get told that once in your entire HADM curriculum, but you should never forget it. You should always be a little humble because what you do drives up their discretionary costs. And what do you think they're going to do if you drive that cost up too high? They're going to cut it off. They won't pay it. So just keep that little trick in your head. Most employees value their health benefits over all other benefits. It's the number one thing that they're interested in. There is a figure 1013 in your book that within a year or two of this lecture will be obsolete, but it does talk about all of the steps of what is included in the Reform Act, whether you call it the Reform Act or Obamacare or the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. It is going in stepwise, 012, 013, 014, different things are kicking in. And that chart shows what's kicking in from an HR perspective. And I'm assuming if that act stays, some of it is going to stay. All of it may, probably will. There are things that affect the human resources part of the work. The goals of the act are clear. It provide access to more people. They tax everybody in the system to provide that access. Pharmaceutical people pay more, hospitals pay more, or they get less. The pharmaceuticals, for instance, they're not going to be taxed on drugs, but what happens is the protection for their copyright is lessened from 14 years to 12 years. And so the ability to get generic drugs into the system is increased by 2 years, which is a significant issue for the VA and Medicare and Medicaid, et cetera. It saves a massive amount of money in the system. And so that's just one example, but everybody's being taxed a little bit to increase access. It is designed to rein in costs. There are lots of things involved in the act to lower costs, and to basically refinance the entire Reform Act. So there's a lot of money being borrowed from different places to do that, so they can kick in over a 4-year period. The trend is going to obviously be to shift more healthcare costs to workers and probably to drop benefits. So as employers have to pay more to increase access for people across the whole country, what's going to happen is that they're going to reduce benefits or they're going to drop coverage. There are lots of people at the bottom end of the scale, the small companies, where it actually would be cheaper to drop coverage than pay the fines per employee for not having coverage, and so that's going to happen. You're going to see people in the 50 to 75 employee range drop coverage and pay fines. Now what's going to happen is Congress will increase the fines and those people will pop back into the system. And obviously, again, I'm talking in 2012, one of the issues right now is that a number of states have refused to start the state systems for registries of healthcare plans, Texas being one of them, because they think that Romney will win the election and drop Obamacare, and they won't have to have a registry of healthcare plans, and we'll know that in a month. So all of you that are well beyond the election that hear this tape, forget it. But that's happening right now as we talk. Another discretionary plan or wellness plans. Lots of companies have wellness plans that to decrease smoking or deal with chronic diseases like diabetes, or they have fairs where they check people's blood pressure and cholesterol and stuff like that. Breast cancer fairs. There's a lot of things that go on in companies that are aimed at wellness. Stress reduction, sleeping at night. Those are all paid for by the company and they're discretionary. One of the things that's happening here in Houston is that the hospitals are refusing to hire people who smoke. Right now there's a number of organizations in Houston that if you smoke, they will not hire you because smokers drive up their health care costs. Smokers also take more days off and are less productive. And that's all been shown by research. However, there are 21 states in the United States that make it illegal to discriminate against smokers. Remember, I said in Chapter 3 with EEO law that states can add to the classes that are protected, and they've added marriage, and they've added sexual preference, and they've added a number of other things as protected classes. 21 states have added smoking as a protected class. So in 21 states, like Washington, Oregon, California, and the more liberal states, you cannot say if you're a smoker, I won't hire you. You cannot discriminate based on smoking. But in Texas, you can. And so you're starting to see companies do that. And they will. I mean, absolutely. Drives up costs like crazy smokers do. Well, HIPAA is another discretionary issue. Um, well, it's quasi-discretionary, but basically, HIPAA was originally passed with two things in mind. One was to limit pre-existing conditions, and the second was to increase privacy for benefit plans, health plans. And a lot of what's in HIPAA, the privacy stuff still is there, and you've probably heard a lot about that in other classes. But the pre-existing thing is being overtaken by the Reform Act. And so, so some of that right now for a small period of time is discretionary, but it's going to not be discretionary by 2014. Life insurance is the oldest and most common benefit. That's the first benefit that was offered by companies. And I'm not going to go into great detail on life insurance, but it's basically insurance that you can buy, typically paid for by the employee, but subsidized by the employer, particularly at the executive ranks, that will pay your beneficiaries a certain amount if you die. Most companies also buy life insurance on their executives where it pays the company if they die. My wife owns a company and she has a partner. There's two people, and they both have insurance policies that are paid to the other if they die. Plus life insurance that I get, which I don't want, but anyway, you can do that. And most companies do. Most companies provide life insurance to employees. Most companies insure the life of their executives. Retirement plans are discretionary. Most companies have some form of retirement. It's basically a long-term capital accumulation plan so that you put money away over time, and then when you finally reach retirement age, you have a bank account with money in it to help support your retirement. There are two kinds of retirement plans. One is defined benefit, and the other is defined contribution. A defined benefit pays a specific sum for an amount of years worked, and then at your retirement, there's a retirement benefit that's figured, and you get that sum for the rest of your life. Most companies have done away with defined benefit plans. Those that had defined benefit plans as part of a union contract have renegotiated their contracts and gotten rid of those or paid the union to take them over. Ford, GM, big issues in the last few years where the unions took over the defined contribution plan. And what that did is that it took a huge financial burden that was underfunded off the shoulders of the company. And in all their accounting, they didn't have to account for that future loss. And that, in essence, makes them much more competitive with companies like Toyota and Hyundai and whomever, because those are newer companies. Those companies don't have the big, long group of retired employees who have a defined benefit, and that they have to keep putting money into to fund that benefit. And so now the large auto companies have gotten rid of their defined benefit plans. They've taken a huge cash write-offs to do it, but it's gone. And now they can come and compete head-to-head with Toyota and Hyundai and the other companies because they don't have to keep putting a big proportion of their profit away to fund their defined benefit plans. And so most companies have dropped defined benefit, and they now have defined contribution plans. A defined contribution plan is that you put a prescribed amount of money into a retirement account, a savings account, a 401k for private companies. For non-private like myself as an employee of the state, it's a 403b plan, but it's a defined plan that I own, but I can't touch until I retire. And so I put money in there, and the employer puts money in there every month, um, and it builds up, and it's invested someplace. That's what you have to worry about, because it tends to be invested in the stock market. However, for most employers, you can choose to put your money into money market funds or someplace that's a little safer, that has a guaranteed benefit, and it's protected as far as the total sum that's in there. But you can put it into the stock market, and you can put it into high risk or low risk. You can decide where it goes. The company decides what plans are acceptable. And the company also decides when you can touch it and how you can touch it. Most companies, because of federal restrictions, have become very restrictive about that. I cannot touch mine until I retire, and I used to be able to borrow against it, but I can't borrow against it now, even for a big event like my house burning down or something, or getting cancer. And so mine sits there and waits until I quit my job. It's not really retirement, it's quit my job. Once I quit my job, I own it. But it sits there, and it has restrictions, et cetera, et cetera. But most companies have gone to defined contributions. Most companies have 401k plans. Those pension plans are guaranteed by the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, which is part of ERISA. ERISA is a law that ERISA is defined in your textbook someplace, because I don't know, I'd have to look it up to define it. But ERISA basically defines when you own your retirement. It defines vesting. You can vest at 5 years or 10 years, etc. But it defines when you fully own your benefit plan, and it defines how you can get it in the end. And it also includes the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, which will assume pensions that a company can't pay. Now, the corporation is underfunded. It's got a huge deficit, $20 billion or so. And so basically defined benefit plans keep falling behind in their contributions to the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, and they have less and less money to cover failed retirement plans. But that's what that organization does, and up to this point they've been able to cover all failed benefit plans from companies that have gone out of business. And so the government does have a role in pension plans. ERISA, E-R-I-S-A, that law covers when you get funded and how you can get your money and what happens if your fund goes bankrupt. Civil Rights Act obviously covers it. The Age Discrimination Act covers it, etc. So there are a number of things. There's two more discretionary times of pay. One is time off pay, and the other is employee services. Time off is vacations, holidays, sick leave, personal days, days to perform civic duties like jury duty, or if you're in the National Guard and you have to go for your 2-week summer training, that kind of stuff. Long-term disability, most companies have insurance for short-term or long-term disability. I have both. If I get disabled, I'm going to be paid to stay home, and you guys will have a new instructor. It's really cool. But long-term disability is a time-off program. Many companies have banks for paid time off. If you have sick days and they accumulate, you can put sick days into a bank for other employees to draw from. The University of Houston-Clear Lake has such a bank. And our ex-secretary in healthcare had breast cancer, and we all contributed to her time off, so she didn't lose any paid time. Because I get sick time every week or every month, and I never use it. I mean, I come to class sick and dying and double vision and I mean all busted up, and I can still teach. And even if I'm totally busted up, I can teach online. So, so I give my sick days to other people to a certain extent. Employee services are education programs, employee assistance programs, any kind of mental health, wellness programs, employee recognition programs. Many companies have child care programs where they provide child care. Many companies provide cafeterias that are subsidized. Most hospitals do, by the way. It's a fixed cost for a hospital. You got to have a cafeteria to feed your patients and your visitors, so why not subsidize the cost for the employees? So, anyway, those are all discretionary. Everything we've talked about, we've put in the category of it's required by federal, state, or local law. You have to do it. And we've covered 5 things that are discretionary. The employer may or may not do them at their discretion. So you can see that you have a lot of money coming to you in your pay. Some of it's dollars and cents in your paycheck. Some of it's being collected by the federal government out of your paycheck to pay for some benefits like Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security and et cetera. And then some of it's purely discretionary, like time off or holidays, or your benefits like health care or retirement, et cetera, wellness plans, counseling out of the Human Resources Department for financial or personal mental health stuff. So there's a lot of things that you get for working, and the employer pays for all of it, essentially. And they consider it a total labor cost, with 30 or 40% of it being benefits and 60 or 70% of it being pay you collect in your paycheck. Obviously, some of that 60 or 70%, like 10 or 15% of it, goes directly to taxes to cover federally mandated benefits. And so it's a complicated system of benefits. Now, there's a section of your book on international compensation. I'm not going to cover that, but what we've gone through is basically what a pay system looks like. We've talked about the pay side and the benefit side. We've talked about how you create equity in the pay side within an organization and between organizations with job evaluation. It's a fairly quick review of all the laws that are affecting compensation, and there are a number, including going back to Chapter 3 with all the equal employment laws. So that's it. Sum up, turn the camera off. I'm done. Till the next time.